If you've ever read the story of Samson and Delilah, it is such an interesting story. But I want to tell you how you have a Delilah in your weight loss journey. All right, let's go. Welcome to the Overweighted podcast, where we get real about what it actually takes to lose weight by putting your faith first. My name's Malaika. I'm your host, weight loss mentor and coach. Join me as I share biblical truth and practical steps to help you follow God in your weight loss journey. And we're not just talking about habits here, we're getting to the root of what's actually keeping you stuck. And as you walk with Christ in your health journey, you'll find freedom so you can finally mark lose weight off of your to-do list for good. So we're going to talk about how you have a Delilah in your weight loss journey. And this is going to make so much sense in a minute here. But before I get into that, I want to make a quick announcement. I am so excited to share that Whole and Holy Girls Club is now free. I have had this amazing community for over 2 years. It was a paid community from when Whole and Holy Girls launched in 2024. It was January 1st, 2024. It was the official launch. And the Lord has been doing a work in there. He has been working on me specifically as the leader, the founder, the owner of Whole and Holy. And He has refined me and gotten me to this place of just really understanding that He wants Whole and Holy Girls Club to be more like a ministry. And it's not 501c3 or nonprofit or anything like that, but in the way that I work Whole and Holy Girls Club, that is more like a ministry. And everything else I do, like my collections, the Christian stationery business, that will be the business. And one of the nuggets that he gave me as I was listening to this other podcast was the person that was being interviewed, the guest was saying that the Lord told him, if you take care of my business, I will take care of yours. And I had just prayed for an answer about what it was the Lord wanted me to do before I watched that episode. And throughout the entire episode, I was just getting all types of nuggets and answers from the Lord. But that was a big one. And that is what the Lord was telling me. Just take care of my business and I will take care of yours. And so that was confirmation. And I still was wrestling a little with making it free, but he just kept nudging me until I gave in before the end of the night, or really it was early the next morning, and made it free. And so Whole and Holy Girls Club is now free. If you want to join us, go to wholeandholygirls.club. That is where you can join us. And let me tell you, this is for the Christian woman who is ready to do the inner healing and deliverance work. You're ready to do the spirit and the soul work to get free from the weight on your physical body. Because we know it is not about the diets and all that stuff, especially if you have been struggling for years because you've tried all those things. And I'm not saying diets and things don't work. They work for who they work for. But if you've been struggling for years, you know that that's not your issue. There's a reason that you're not sticking to it. And so there could be mind renewal. There could be unhealed trauma. There's things that are going on. There could be demon oppression even. So there's things that are going on that are not allowing you to do what you need to do in order to lose the weight. And so that's what we're addressing inside of Whole and Holy Girls Club. And that's why the Lord wants this to be more of a ministry, because you are going to get inner healing and deliverance as you are in this club. So if you want to join us, wholeandholygirls.club. Say hi to me when you join. Let me know you're from the podcast. I would appreciate that. All right, so let's jump into this episode. So we're going to talk about Samson and Delilah, and I want to share how you have a Delilah in your weight loss journey. And I'm going to read a good clip of Judges 16. That's where we see the story of Samson and Delilah. But I am going to kind of backtrack. We're going to start in Judges 13, just in case you're not familiar with the story, or maybe you need a refreshing. But I would also really encourage you to read Judges 16 on your own, or read all of Judges, read the whole Bible, by the way, but read it on your own, because as I'm going through, I'm going to be interjecting and saying things, but that way you can just kind of read the full story without my commentary in between. So I really do want to encourage you to read it on your own. But like I said, we are going to start in Judges 13, and I'm just going to read a little bit here, a little bit in 14, and then we're going to read a lot of 16. But just for some background info, we're going to go into 13 and 14. But Judges 13 and 3, it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her," and this is Samson's mother, "Indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines." And that's Judges 13, 3 through 5. And so as you go through the story, she tells her husband, they get confirmation, and they're told this again by the angel of the Lord. And so they know this is going to happen. And so just so you know, for clarity, so Nazarite, when you look this up, so if you're looking it up in Strong's to understand what Nazarite is, and it would be in the Hebrew because it is Old Testament. It means consecrated one or devoted one or devotee. It also means untrimmed, which is also why they're being instructed not to cut his hair, which is interesting that it means like a vine undressed or an untrimmed vine. And so that's another thing for another day, because this is type and shadow of Jesus as well. But I love that it also means untrimmed vine, but we won't go there because I don't want to make this podcast episode longer than it needs to be. So you see these instructions that she's been given, not to drink wine, eat anything unclean, and once he is born, not to take a razor to his head, because he is supposed to be a Nazarite, or this consecrated one for the Lord. And so as you go through the story, he grows up. He does take a wife from the Philistines. And the other thing I want to point out back in 13, it says he will begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And so that was a prophecy from the angel of the Lord. And so as we go throughout the story, he grows up and he takes a wife of the Philistines. His parents don't like that, but they don't understand that this is actually a part of the Lord's plan for taking down the Philistines, since they were oppressing the Israelites at that time. And as we go through the story, he poses this riddle to these men that he knows that the men can't figure out, but it's a way for him to kind of get some spoils. And so he's like, if you can figure it out, then I'll have to give you spoils. If you don't figure it out, you have to give it to me. And they don't use the word spoils. I'm just saying that. But basically, whatever it was that they decided to bet on, and they weren't figuring it out. And so they go to Samson's wife and they basically threaten her to harm her and her family if she doesn't tell them the secret. And so she doesn't know what the secret is, but we see in Judges 14 and 16, this is where she's going to him, and it says, and we're going to start here, it says, "Then Samson's wife wept on him and said, 'You only hate me. You do not love me. You have posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me.' And he said to her, 'Look, I have not explained it to my father or my mother, so should I explain it to you?' And then in 17, now she had wept on him these 7 days while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her, because she pressed him so much. Then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So she kept bothering him for 7 days and weeping, and he finally gave in because she kept pressing him and told her. And so then she went and told the people, so that then obviously she wanted to save her family, but then also they got the information they needed so that they could win this bet. that they had. And so I wanted to read that because that's going to be really important when we get into the story with Delilah. And so, like I said, in Judges 16, this is where we find the story of Samson and Delilah. And if you're not familiar, you're going to hear it as I go throughout the story. But there was a harlot in Gaza named Delilah, and Samson basically fell in love with her. One of the things that happened as Samson was growing up is that he had acquired this great strength as a gift from the Lord. And so that was one of the things that the Lord was going to use to help him to begin to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. And so he had this great strength where he was causing, disruption amongst the Philistines. And so they wanted to overtake him. And what they did was they knew that he was in love with Delilah. So they got with her and they were like, hey, find out where his strength lies, because they knew they could not overpower him. So they're like, we got to figure out how to overcome this guy. We got to figure out how it is that he's so strong so that we can bind him and afflict him, are the words that they use. And so they went to her to get this info, and they told her, we will pay you 1,100 pieces of silver if you get this information to us. And so that's where we are in this story. I'm going to start at Judges 16 and 6. And like I said, I really want to encourage you to read this on your own, because I'm going to interject as we go through this story. It says, so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. And it's so funny to me that she's just like, not even trying to cover it up. She said, hey, tell me why you're so strong and how I can bind you so that I can hurt you. Basically, is what she's saying. She's not even trying to hide it. And Samson then says to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so he's lying to her. He doesn't actually reveal the source of his strength. And we know back in Judges 13, it was that no razor should come to his head, right? Because he was consecrated and set apart. And that was the mark of that the Lord would be with him because he was this consecrated one. And so he was not to have any razor come to his head. And let me back that up. The source of his strength is the Lord. Let me rephrase that. But the reason he was gifted with this was because of the fact that he was this consecrated one that never had a razor come to his head. And so then it says in Judges 16:8, so the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire, so the secret of his strength was not known. And so it's so funny that she asked him, like, hey, how can I bind you so that, I can overpower you and you can be harmed? So he told her this lie. And then he wakes up and finds himself wrapped up in the very way that he told her. And then she tried to pretend that she was still on his side by saying, hey, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he wakes up and of course he just breaks free, because that's not really how he can be overpowered. But what's interesting is what happens as we continue the story. It says in Judges 16:10, then Delilah said to Samson, look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with. And so he knows that she's trying to trick me, and she asked me how I could be overpowered. She did that thing and then tried to set me up. And instead of him leaving, he then says to her, if they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so he doesn't leave. He stays around her, and she asks him again, and he tells her another lie the second time. And so she does it again. And then we see in 12, she does the exact thing that he says. And then she says, the Philistines are upon you. And of course, because that wasn't actually the source of his strength, he breaks free. And it says he broke them off his arms like a thread. And so they weren't able to overtake him. And then instead of leaving, he's still there. And she asked him again, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of a loom. And so she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom. So here she is doing it again. And then says, the Philistines are upon you. And he wakes up, and each time, like, I guess she does it while he's sleeping. And so she pretends to kind of warn him. So it looks like she's still on his side, but yet you're the one that I'm telling these secrets and you're doing the thing. And then of course he wakes up. That's not the way to overpower him. That's not the way for him to lose his strength. And in Judges 16 and 15, it says, then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? Now this sounds a lot like what happened with his wife back in Judges 14. You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. So the same thing that his wife was doing when she was trying to get the answer to that riddle from him. In Judges 16:7, that he told her all his heart and said to her, so let me read that again. It said, when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so he finally, after she continued to pester him, after he continued to, just kind of play around with her, not telling her the truth, he finally ended up telling her the truth. It said like he was so vexed that he told her all his heart. And so when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. So the lords of the Philistine came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for the man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And that's a whole nother thing for another day as well. The fact that it says, then she began to torment him and his strength left. And then she said it again, like she was saying before, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he woke up, but this time he couldn't depart. He couldn't break free. And so the Philistines overtook him. They put out his eyes. They bound him and made him a grinder in the prison. And so that's where he was until his hair started to grow back. And I'm going to let you read the rest of that story. But I wanted to share how you have a Delilah in your weight loss journey. And that Delilah is your flesh. And we see here throughout Samson's life, it seems as though he had a flesh issue, especially when it came to Delilah, right? There was a lust of the flesh. Because here it was that you are with this woman and you see that she is trying to figure out how to bind you and didn't even try to hide it. She said, how do I bind you so that you can be afflicted? And then he kept playing around with her. And then eventually he gave in instead of cutting off the relationship, realizing that she was detrimental, or maybe he did realize, but because of the lust of the flesh, he couldn't stay away. And that's how it is for some of us in our weight loss journeys, is that we have a Delilah, which is our flesh. And the thing is, the reason that Delilah is similar to the flesh in our weight loss journeys is because as we went through the story and you heard, Delilah was not the one that afflicted him necessarily. She was the one that tempted him. She was the one that found out his weakness And she was the one that created the opportunity for the enemy to then come in and overpower him. And so it is with our flesh. So our flesh is not necessarily, the demon that's going to come in to try to overpower us or oppress us, like the spirit of gluttony. The flesh, though, is the one that is in partnership with it. And one thing we have to remember is that our flesh does not mean our physical body necessarily. It can mean that in some instances. But when we're talking about it in this way, our flesh is our carnal nature. It is the part of us that does not want to submit to the Lord. It's the part of us that we're called to crucify daily. It's that part of us that we had that sin nature that wanted to do, like I said, everything except what the Lord wants. Like we see in Galatians 5:16, right? If we walk in the Spirit, then we will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And so our flesh is that carnal nature. And that's our Delilah. And the thing is, the flesh is in partnership in a way with the enemy. And the reason we have to crucify our flesh is for the same reasons we see here. Because he did not cut off the relationship, it ended up being to his detriment. And so that is why we have to crucify our flesh daily. And see, the thing is, instead of Samson cutting off the relationship, he kept giving in to his fleshly desires. And he tried to entertain her. He tried to, play around with her and tell her lies. He probably thought he would never give in. But the thing was, like we saw in the story, as she kept pressing him, it vexed him so much that he finally gave in. And we know it tells us in 1 Corinthians 6:18 to flee sexual immorality. But instead, he stayed. And it's telling us that for different reasons than what's happening here in this story. But it's still a situation that you're going to put yourself in that's going to be to your detriment when you don't flee sexual immorality. And also in 1 Corinthians 10:13, it tells us no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. So you're going to be tempted, but when you fall into it, just know that it's not anything that's not common. But God is faithful, as it says, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. And so we see here that he had multiple opportunities as a way of escape because he didn't tell her the first time. And if he would have stayed away, then it wouldn't have led to the second. And if he would have stayed away that second time, then it wouldn't have led to the third. And had he stayed away that third time, then it wouldn't have gotten to the situation where then he finally was vexed so much that he finally gave in and he lost his strength. And what's so interesting too, it tells us in James 1:14-15, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. And we see that in this story as well as you continue to read, that it ended up costing him his life. He still ended up fulfilling, praise God, the assignment of beginning to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. He still ended up destroying the Philistines even after this point, but it cost him his life. And some of us may think, well, it's not that serious with our weight loss journeys, but isn't it? Some of us are doing the same thing. Like I said, our Delilah is our flesh, but the flesh is opening the door to the enemy, which may be spirit of gluttony, or it may be a spirit of addiction. It may be a spirit of infirmity, as now we're dealing with health consequences. So it is that serious. And the other thing that we have to realize with this is that if we don't crucify our flesh, if we don't flee from Delilah, that eventually we will give in. Just like we read with Samson and his wife and with Delilah, eventually he gave in. Instead of just shutting them down, like making his wife stop asking or fleeing from Delilah, eventually he gave in. And we don't know why he did it. Maybe he thought he could outsmart them. Maybe he thought he would never give in. We don't know. But that's exactly why we have instructions in scripture that tells us to flee, that tells us to take that way of escape, that tells us to submit to the Lord, resist the devil, and he will flee. We don't stand there and play around with the flesh, play around with temptation, thinking that we can overcome it. There's a reason that the Lord doesn't tell you to do that. Because eventually, because of that carnal nature, because of the flesh, because of the desires of the flesh, we'll give in. And I want to give you an example of what this would look like in our weight loss journeys. So I had a really big issue with sweets. We call it a sweet tooth, but let's be real, it's an addiction. I had a sugar addiction, and praise God, he freed me from that. That took some work, but he did. But there was an issue I used to have with this slice of birthday cake from the grocery store. And it's conveniently near my house now, but at this grocery store that I liked. And I would have this cake like every day. And when the Lord was taking me through this process of being delivered from the sugar addiction and not falling into it anymore, I noticed that I could not go to that store and not get that cake. So I had to either completely avoid that section of the store, and I knew where it was, obviously, because I was getting it all the time, but I couldn't even walk by that section because I knew I would give in. And it got to a point where I couldn't even go to that store. I had to find a new store to go to until I was free because the store made this cake, so it was only at that store. Once I got free, now I can walk by it. It doesn't faze me. I can look at it. I could even smell it, but it doesn't even bother me. And I'm not saying I never get it because I still do rarely, but I do still get it. But this is like years removed now from when he delivered me from that. But even still, I have to make sure, like, check myself. Am I feeling like this is an issue where now I'm starting to want it more again? But anyway, so that was a case where I knew that was something that my flesh desired. So I had to cut it off. I couldn't play around with it. I couldn't have a couple bites and think I wasn't going to finish the whole thing. I couldn't continue to go to that store and pretend like it wasn't a problem for me and walk by it. I knew I would fall in. So I had to take the way of escape, not go by the section, and then, like I said, eventually not go by the store at all. Because my flesh was going to try to keep tempting me, just like Delilah was continue to try to get that information from him so that she could figure out, how do I take his strength? How do I make it so that he can be overcome and afflicted? Our flesh does the same thing. Like, what do I need to do so that she can be overpowered and I can open this door to the enemy? What are the ways or the things that I can continue to entice her with so that she can then be overpowered and the enemy can step in and take over? That's your flesh. That's your Delilah. And so we have to crucify it daily. And it's not one of those things necessarily where you just crucify it once and then you're done. There's a reason he says to take up your cross daily. There's a reason that Paul says, I die daily. It is a daily process. And if we don't take the time to flee from the temptation, to crucify the flesh is going to continue to tempt until you give in and gratify those desires so that you can be overcome and overpowered. But to end on a high note, like I said, the redemption in this story was that his hair started to grow back. Now, hindsight, is 2020. Me, like, y'all see his hair growing back. Why didn't you cut it again? Because you knew that was the way that he lost his strength, was with his haircut. But anyway, thank God they didn't for whatever reason. And so he prayed and asked the Lord, basically to use him again. And so he was given the opportunity to destroy many Philistines, as he also lost his life at the end. But that prophecy that was given, that word from the angel of the Lord that was given back in Judges 13, that he would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines, was fulfilled. And in that same way, even with us falling into the lust of the flesh, gratifying the desires of the flesh, the Lord can still use us too, and will, even when we're not always submitting, even when we're not always resisting the enemy, even when we're not always walking in the Spirit and crucifying the flesh. The Lord can still use us, and he will if he can. But that doesn't mean that we won't have consequences for our behavior and for the things that we've done. But when we do crucify that flesh, when we do cut off the relationship with our Delilah, then we get to walk fully in all God has called us to do, and not only advance his kingdom and fulfill the call on our lives, but we get to enjoy the benefits of doing it too. All right, so be aware of the ways that your flesh is trying to be a Delilah in your life and trying to figure out what ways you can be overpowered. For you, it may not be sweets. Like I said, for me, it was sweets. It was the cake and then other things. For you, it could be Nana's fried chicken, or it could be pizza or Chinese food, whatever your thing may be. But be aware of that. And instead of tempting it and thinking like, oh, I can just have it this one time, I'll be fine, and then realizing that you've fallen into gluttony, cut it off. Take that way of escape from that temptation. We have to be vigilant. We have to be watchful. We have to take note of these things so that we can come out of the bondage, not just of our physical weight, but of the weight that we're carrying on our spirit and our soul as well. All right. So I hope I get to see you inside of Whole and Holy Girls Club. I would love for you to join us in there, and I will talk to you next time. All right, have a blessed day. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If something in this episode spoke to you, go ahead and leave a review. It helps other women find the show and start their journey too. I'd also love to connect with you, so come find me on social media and YouTube at Malaika Burley. And if you're ready to go deeper, I want you to grab my free workshop at malaikaburley.com, where I walk you through what this journey actually requires so you can stop starting over and begin walking with God in your weight loss journey. All of those links are in the show notes. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.